Just want to do a quick follow-up to the Altoona Mafia video that I posted. It actually generated a lot of interesting comments and controversy. I typically don't do true crime type material. I just find it's a little bit too negative for my channel, and I'd rather not dwell on some of these unfortunate incidents that happen within our society. But I have done a few already, and typically the ones that I focus on are incidents that I think need to be told and remembered. But I realized after seeing all the comments in my video that there were a lot of people and lives that were affected by the incidents in 1979. I was surprised to see that I was pretty much contacted by families of everyone that was involved in the 1979 incidents, and including members of the family. For the most part, they were all positive. People wanted to know the history of their family. They wanted to know what happened, what the involvement was. There were a few that didn't want to bring this stuff up again. They just wanted to leave it go as it was and didn't want to have to go through it again. And I completely understand that. I'm not sure that I would want this stuff coming back up 45 years later if it involved my family on either side. But beyond that, some of the additional comments about the area history around that time and leads into other things. A lot of people want me to keep digging into this. So I'd like to review some of the comments here that I plan to continue to investigate to take this a little bit further, because this gets even more fascinating. So starting with John Caramadri, I did receive comments from family members who wanted to add additional information in reference to John. One of the comments was from an account under the name John Varilla. I don't know if this is John Varilla Jr. or a grandson, but he took issue with a few things. One was my opening comment of maybe the family still has some type of influence up there today. He also took issue with me exploring the potential link between Francis Misitano's killing and Preston Ryan. I don't know if he was joking or not, but he did indicate that there are Jay's Bar t-shirts out there available that say "Don't break my balls," so that's interesting. But he did suggest that I reach out if I want to hear how the lifestyle actually was, so I did give him my email. Hopefully he'll contact me. He mentioned something about possibly writing a book. Once again, I'm not sure if he was joking, but I think he should write a book. So I also heard from ancestors of Nick the Blade, who was an enforcer for the LaRocca family. He wanted to know more about Nick's history to see if I could do some type of deep dive into that. I saw Goodfellas years ago, and I didn't realize this until I started researching this video, that Nick the Blade is actually the Pittsburgh connection that is that Henry Hill indicates in the movie The Goodfellas.
For dinner that night, and then I had to pick up some new Pittsburgh stuff for Lois to fly down to some customers I had. As long as I kept getting this stuff from Pittsburgh, I knew Paulie would never find out.
So, I mean, that's actually a true story of Henry Hill working with the Lucchese family and meeting Nick the Blade and him being his connection in Pittsburgh. So I definitely want to dig further into that one. Now, when I started this thing, I talked about my neighbor mentioning that he was a collector for the mob. The name that kept coming up was Mike Trafficani. That's the guy he said that he collected for back during this era, which would have been, early 70s, mid 70s when I was living up there. So the interesting thing about Trafficani, like I said in my video, it appears that he was equivalent or equal in status to Varilla, since they are both mentioned as possible underboss replacements at one point in the 80s. But I did receive some interesting information about Trafficani's life in Altoona, how he grew up, but his farm that he owned up on Wapsie Mountain. I remember my neighbor mentioning that he would go up there sometimes, and Mike had Trafficani had a pool or some type of natural spring or something that they would hang out in. So I mentioned something about that to the source that gave me this information, and they confirmed that, yeah, there was actually a natural spring up there. But one of the fascinating pieces of information that came from this source was that Trafficani allegedly mentioned to this person that Hoffa was at his farm at least one time, and that he would come up there for hunting trips. So that led to the source and I to start talking about the scene in the Jimmy Hoffa movie where he is actually with the mob out on a hunting trip, and Danny DeVito shoots a deer. But yeah, I mean, was that on Mike Trafficani's farm? I don't know. I'd like to try to find some link to Hoffa, coming into Pennsylvania. So allegedly Trafficani was part of the union at that point for the railroad, so he would potentially have ties with Hoffa at that point. So I definitely plan on digging further into that one. Another interesting fact about the location of Trafficani's farm is it was on Wapsie Mountain, not too far from the Buckhorn Inn, in the same area as the game lands where Misitano was found. Now, as far as Caracciolo, I received a message from a guy, a cryptic message basically stating, when the time comes, I will send you more information in reference to Caracciola and how he really was. The commenter added that Caracciola was way worse than the incidents that we already know about in 1979. So hopefully we'll hear more about that. Another name that often popped up in the comments was Hardy Lamont, who owned the Venetian Gardens. That commenter indicated that Lamont and others would hang out at a place called Bum's Woods and gamble. He said that location was at the end of 29th Avenue by power lines. I don't really see any power lines on the map in that area. There were a few mentions of interesting stories around a place called the Oriental, which is now the Gallitzin Legion, so I need to look further into that one. So I was also contacted by ancestors of Joe the Weep Ruggiero. I hope I'm saying that right. But Ruggiero was the guy that I mentioned in my previous video that tipped off Verrilla that McDermott was operating his own gambling operation out of the Roundhouse Inn. Ruggiero apparently ran mainly just gambling operations, but he did own the 12th Street News, which was located at 711 12th Street. It's no longer there. Apparently, Ruggiero lived over on 2nd Avenue, not far from Highland Park. There were also several comments about tunnels under the city. One of them allegedly went from the high school to Boyer Candies, and another one was allegedly under the Altoona Hospital. So I did reach out to a friend of mine who used to work in the Altoona Hospital, and he said he heard the same thing. He didn't see the tunnels, but there were people there talking about the tunnels downstairs that were blocked off. I talked to my dad, who graduated from Altoona High School, to see if he was aware of any tunnels that went from the school to Boyer Foods. So he did confirm there were tunnels from the high school to Roosevelt. And he also brought up there was some type of drainage ditch that was, I guess, covered up possibly when they put hills in. That was in the area of Boyer Foods. So he remembers going back there, and he said it was lit up from what he remembers, but he was a kid when he was in there, and they used to walk back there as kids. But there was some type of drainage ditch or tunnel in that area, but he didn't think it connected Boyer to the school tunnels. So I had many people reach out to me about unsolved murders in that general area of Altoona and Johnstown. The first one was Constance Krieger. She died in a house fire that was ruled arson, but that was in 2005, so it didn't really have anything to do with this area that I was focused on, but it's definitely one to put on the list to dig into later. The next one was Thomas Down, who was killed at the Coach's Inn in Greenwood, PA in 1980. There isn't really much information out there about this. The family member indicated that it was ruled suicide, but there were many suspicious things surrounding that actual event. But his brother does try to keep his memory alive by posting every year asking for any information relating to that incident. The source indicated that this Coach's Inn was at one time called City Limits and then Kryptonite. I did find some information showing that a coach from Altoona High School did own it looks like a restaurant over in Greenwood, so I'm thinking that might have been called Coach's Inn, but there aren't any newspaper articles or anything pointing directly to that location. So if anybody knows where Coach's Inn was, leave me a comment below. One person indicated that they graduated with George David Carnes, who was 18 years old when he was killed at a gas station in Duncansville. That is a crazy story. After I started to dig into it, I realized that a spree killer came through Altoona in 1976. 20-year-old Jeffrey Doherty and Bonnie Jean Heath came through here. Starting on March 4th, 1976, they robbed Richie's Music in Altoona and beat up the 71-year-old sales clerk Ruth Montgomery. 5 days later, on March 9th, they robbed Jack's Quick Mart near Bellwood and killed 40-year-old employee Elizabeth Shank of Tipton. On March 11th, before fleeing Altoona, they would rob the Shell Oil gas station in Duncansville and kill the attendant, 18-year-old George Carnes. Doherty's killing spree would start on March 1st when he killed a female hitchhiker in Florida. Both Doherty and Heath were eventually captured by police, and he was executed in Florida in 1988. I received comments in reference to the killing of Misitano. One person claimed that he heard it was due to a motorcycle that was taken from him and possibly had something to do with one of the two motorcycle gangs that were in the area at that time, which was the Seekers and the Animals. So before we get into the various gangs of Altoona at that time, I just want to touch on Jay's Bar. So unfortunately, we don't have a definitive answer yet. Some were saying that Jay's Bar was the previous Mountain City Tavern, which, if you look at the address of that, it was located on the side of the alley of the Triangle, where the current Triangle Barbershop is. Looking at the old maps, there was a building where that parking lot's at now, and there was also a building across the street where several others are saying is where Jay's Bar was located. So it looks like it was on one or the other side of that alley there. We still don't know. I'd love to finally get some pictures eventually of Jay's Bar to lock that down, but at this point we don't know for sure. So apparently there are two bike gangs up there, the Seekers and the Animals. And it sounds like they didn't get along and one might have ran the other one out of town according to some of the comments. I did find some articles about the Seekers and the fact that they were being mentioned and blamed for a shooting in a field near Williamsburg where a guy was killed. 20-year-old William Richardson of Williamsburg killed 18-year-old Michael Monahan of Altoona after a fight. One of the members of the Seekers at that time spoke out saying that they had nothing to do with it. The defense attorney for Richardson was claiming that he shot in self-defense because it was basically the bunch of Seekers bike gang members coming after him. And allegedly there was a jacket found there that had the Seekers rocker on the back, and they were using that to imply that this was Seekers activity, even though they denied it. Then we had the infamous 29th Street gang that was supposedly active in that area in the early to mid 70s. And one of the members allegedly stole a tank from an armory there. I can't find any newspaper articles indicating that a tank was stolen from the armory. You'd think that's something they'd put in print, but maybe they didn't want anybody to know about it. So that's one that I want to continue with when I do the whole Gangs of Altoona video, so stay tuned for that. But the interesting thing about that area of 29th Street is I've been working on research and a production about the actress Haida Hopper, who grew up right around the corner there. Before she went off to Hollywood and became a gossip columnist and eventually an actress, and her son was one of the lead actors in Perry Mason, she grew up down there, and her parents owned the apartment complex on the corner of 29th, I think it's Maple. But that butcher shop and apartment complex eventually became AJ's Bar, which was some of the other comments that people left in reference to the Altoona Mafia. I'm not sure what the reference was there. I think they were confusing Jay's Bar with AJ's. But yeah, Haida Hopper's family's butcher shop was previously in that apartment complex where AJ's Bar now stands. I don't think it's a bar anymore, though. So yeah, stay tuned to the upcoming productions about all of these fascinating stories about Altoona history, and please keep the information coming.